What's up sa inyo guys? It's your boy Ian. Nagbabalik na naman sa panibagong reaction video today. Hindi tayo magre-react today sa mga tawag doon, sa mga scary, tapos di tayo magre-react today sa mga funny videos. So today, dahil Holy Week ngayon. Holy Week ko to guys ginagawa no. Ngayon ano tayo ngayon? Good Friday yata ngayon. So siguro na-upload ko to Saturday na. So yun guys. Magre-react tayo ngayon, magpapabanal muna tayo guys today dahil Holy Week, para rin kay Lord. And syempre, para rin maiba tong nire-react natin kasi puro tayo horror no. Hindi ko lang alam kasi parang ang dami ng lahat na napapanood ko na horror, parang nasa bahay na namin. So para matanggal, magpapabanal tayo today guys. Manonood tayo ng Here's How the 12 apostles actually died. So yun yung papanoorin natin ngayon. Shoutout kay Origins Explain. Sila yung channel. So yun guys, re-react natin to. Alam ko malamang iba dyan, alam na kung paano sila namatay, pero sa mga hindi, i-react natin ngayon. Siyempre si Holy Week ngayon guys. Siyempre kailangan din natin para i-Lord to. So yun guys, simulan natin to bago pa simulan ng iba. Basta ganyan na guys, try na ay ano ba yung sinasabi ko nun? Ano ba yung sinasabi ko nun? Nalimutan ko na yun Ayun, banata na natin to bago pa banata ng iba. Let's go.
Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 12, Peter. Also known as
Peter.
Simon Peter and Cephas. Peter was the leader of the 12 disciples. He came from the ancient fishing village of Bethsaida along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The Bible often portrays Peter as gentle but firm and extremely loyal to Jesus, but he wasn't perfect. When Jesus was arrested, Peter was afraid for his life, so he disowned him to avoid persecution.
Yun guys, alam na ni Lord yun na itatanggi siya ni Peter. Sinabi niya na rin kay Peter yun na itatanggi siya ni Peter no. Dahil nga natatakot din si Peter na mahuli. Kasi alam ng mga guards na yung mga Roman na guards na tawag doon, na kasama siya doon sa apostles na ni Jesus. Kaya ang gagawin ni Peter, tinanggi niya sa sobrang takot. Pero si Peter, pinagsisihan niya yun na habang buhay guys. Pinagsisihan niya yun.
Educated man, Peter was untrained in Mosaic law and was a slow learner who repeatedly made mistakes. But when given the opportunity to prove himself, he proved that he was capable. When Jesus walked on water, Peter joined him. Peter witnessed numerous miracles, including the time Jesus brought a dead girl back to life. In what's known as the Great Fire of Rome, 2/3 of Rome burned down in 64 AD. The Emperor Nero blamed Christians and crucified Peter. He was crucified upside down because he felt unworthy of dying the same way as Jesus.
And guys, no, sobrang hirap nung guys, nag-add, no. Sasabihin ko lang guys, sobrang hirap nung pagkamatay ni Peter. Isipin mo naman, yung kay Jesus, no, pinako ka na. Pero si Jesus kasi pinako na nakatayo, no. Parang nakaganyan, nakadiretso na ganun. Siya pinako siya ng napatiwarik. Sipin mo naman guys, no. Ako nga ang tawag doon. Ako magbabaliktad lang ng kumari sa upuan, ay sa higaan. Gaganto ko lang yung ulo ko dito sa may dulo ng higaan. Parang lahat na ng dugo pumupunta na dito. Nahirapan ako agad. Sipin mo siya, pinako na siya tapos patiwarik pa siya pinao. So sobrang hirap nun guys. Kaya grabe yung paghihirap nila nun.
Number 11, James.
Kaya siya pinao daw ng ganun dahil ayaw daw niya. Parang feeling niya unworthy siya para mamatay ng kaparehas ni Jesus, no guys.
Son of Zebedee. Also known as James the Greater, James, son of Zebedee, was one of Jesus' main disciples and one of 2 apostles named James. The Bible recounts how he and his brother and fellow disciple John asked Jesus if they should call down fire from heaven on a town that refused to show them hospitality. In the book of Mark, James asked Jesus if he and John could sit on either side of his throne and promise to follow him into martyrdom. As the only disciple whose martyrdom is recorded in the Bible, James died by sword at the hands of King Herod, who most likely beheaded him. He's considered the first person to die for Jesus. According to tradition, James was a missionary to Spain and was buried there, but he died in Jerusalem during the very early days of the Christian Church. This belief. Nevertheless, for centuries, Christians have traveled to his alleged burial place in northwestern Spain on an annual pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. Every year, around 300,000 people
So
visit
guys,
the
ito yung mga masabi ko. No? Isipin nyo guys, meron tayong mga ganyan. Meron tayong may mga remains tayo ng mga apostles ni Jesus. Di lang naman yung mga apostles niya, pati yung mga naiwan ni Jesus. No? Kaya hindi ko rin mag-gets yung iba dyan kung bakit parang ayaw pa rin nila maniwala kahit ang dami ng signs, no? Ang dami mo naman na pwede panghawakan na paniwalaan mo na may Diyos talaga, no? Kasi actually nga isa na lang din yung titingin ka sa paligid mo, isipin mo paano nagkaroon ng langit, paano nagkaroon ng ganito, paano nagkaroon ng mga ulap pares lang pala paano magkaroon ng mga tubig, mga dagat, mga ganun, mga hayop, pati tayong mga tao, no? Paano tayo nabuo, no? Yun na lang yung isipin nyo guys, no?
sign of
So
St.
hindi ko pa rin
James.
mag-gets yung iba dyan kung bakit parang ayaw pa rin nila maniwala. Pero hindi naman natin sila mapipilit, no? Meron din naman sila mga gustong paniwalaan. Kaya kung ayaw nila maniwala, edi hayaan na lang natin sila guys. Kasi meron naman tayong mga sarili-sariling choices, no, sa buhay.
The Great in the city of Santiago de Compostela. Number 10. John, son of Zebedee. John, son of Zebedee, was the third member of Jesus' inner circle of disciples and the brother of James the Greater. He's one of several apostles who were fishermen before they were called to Jesus. John is best known for a few key events mentioned in the Bible, including when he took Jesus' mother, Mary, into his home and cared for her. When news broke that Jesus' tomb was empty, John and Peter ran there together. John arrived first, and the pair were mystified by the pile of linens left behind, unaware that Jesus would rise according to the scripture. According to tradition, John was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. He died in 98 AD from old age, unlike many, if not all, of the other disciples. Before John's death, Peter
So si John lang yung pinasuguro merong maayos na pagkamatay sa mga disciples ni Jesus dahil namatay lang siya dahil sa sobrang katandaan na. So di naman ganun kahirap yung pagkamatay niya, no? Dahil lahat naman tayo pag tumanda mamamatay na rin. Kaya siguro sa mga apostles ni Jesus, no, siya na yung hindi nahirapan nung namatay.
had asked Jesus what would happen to John, saying, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus replied by more or less telling Peter that it was none of his business, leading the disciples to believe that John wouldn't die. But they were wrong, and it is now thought that Jesus meant there were different plans for John's death than everyone else's. Number 9.
Nag-ads.
Andrew. Andrew was a fisherman and the first disciple that Jesus called to serve him. Although he wasn't one of the 3 main disciples, he was known as one of the disciples more closely attached to Jesus. Before that, Andrew was a disciple of Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. Andrew
Ooh.
brought Peter to Jesus and told him that Jesus is the Messiah.
Ito guys, sa mga hindi na alam, si John the Baptist, yun yung nagbinyag kay Jesus, no?
though Peter typically gets all the credit for recognizing Jesus as the Messiah.
Alam ko, ang pagkamatay ni John the Baptist naman, parang pinugutan din ang ulo, diba? Correct nyo na lang ako guys kung tama ako o mali. Pero ang alam ko, nakuha rin siya ng mga guards, mga Roman guards, tapos pinapugot yung ulo niya. Alam ko yun yung pagkamatay niya.
This is just one example of how Andrew almost always came second to his brother in the scriptures. This was likely because he was either younger or considered less important than Peter. Andrew was crucified in 60 AD in the Greek city of Patras. According to the Acts of Andrew, he was bound to an X-shaped cross known as a St. Andrew's cross because, like Peter, he considered himself unworthy of dying the same way.
Ngayon din yung pagkamatay ni Andrew, guys. Pinako rin siya, tapos kinonsider niya rin na unworthy siya para mamatay na kapares ni Jesus. Kaya ang ginawa sa kanya, pa-X. Naka-ganyan. Sipin nyo yun, guys. Hirap din yan. Naka-X.
That Jesus died, he remained suspended for 3 days, preaching the entire time. Earlier texts describe the crucifix used in Andrew's martyrdom as a traditional cross. In both versions of the story, he was bound rather than nailed. Number 8.
Tinali lang siya.
The apostle
Parang tinali lang ata siya. Hindi siya pinako.
Philip is
Yung
only
sabi.
mentioned a handful of times in the New Testament. He's one of 4 men named Philip who are discussed throughout the Bible. To make matters even more confusing, early Bible readers often got all these Philips confused with one another. Very little is known about Philip the Apostle. Like Peter and Andrew, he was from the coastal town of Bethsaida on the Sea of Galilee. The Bible describes some Greek men seeking Philip out because they want to see Jesus, suggesting that Philip may have spoken better Greek than his fellow disciples. He's best known for bringing Nathanael to Jesus. In the book of John, Jesus tests Philip by asking him where to buy bread for a crowd of 5,000 hungry people. Later in the scripture, Philip asks Jesus to show them God the Father. Jesus responds, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." There are varying accounts of Philip's death, which likely happened around 80 AD. One claims that he died from natural causes, while other records suggest that Philip was stoned, beheaded, or crucified upside down. Number 7.
Yung
Bartholomew.
pagkamatay ni Philip the Apostle, parang parang unsolved pa rin kasi ang sinabi sa kanya daw, pwedeng binato. Parang binato ng bato, tapos ang tawag dun, parang katulad din ng pagkamatay ni ng isang apostle ni Jesus, no? Na pinako patiwarik. Pa upside down, guys, tapos isa parang pinugot din yung ulo.
Not much is known about the Apostle Bartholomew other than his name. He may have gone by another name, and he's closely associated with Philip in the Bible, suggesting that the two had a relationship of some sort. Some believe that Bartholomew was also Nathanael. In the Gospel of John, there's an apostle named Nathanael who's closely associated with Philip, and Bartholomew isn't mentioned in John. But others disagree and think that Bartholomew and Nathanael were different people. Bartholomew was likely martyred like most of the other apostles, and there are a variety of claims about how he died. According to the most popular and gruesome version, he was flayed alive and then decapitated. Paintings depicting Bartholomew's death often show him cut up and wearing his skin or holding a flaying knife. Other accounts of Bartholomew's death suggest that he was beaten and crucified upside down.
Yun din, guys, unsolved pa rin itong pagkamatay ni Bartholomew daw, dahil hindi rin nila alam kung anong dahilan, pero sa mga dahilan daw, yung mga pinasikat na dahilan na theory, ang sinabi lang daw na parang sinunog daw, sinunog.
Crucified, taken down while still alive, and then flayed and beheaded, beaten unconscious, and thrown into the sea, and that he was just beheaded. While the specifics surrounding Bartholomew's death are unclear due to the conflicting stories, it's clear that he didn't die from natural causes or from old age. However he passed from this world, it was likely horrible. Which version of this story had you heard or believed to be true? Tell me in the comments. Number 6. Matthew. Also known as Levi, Matthew was a tax collector who collected money for Rome from fellow Jews. In first-century Judaism, this was one of the most criticized and hated professions. It was seen as a form of betrayal that represented Rome's occupation of Israel. So when Jesus asked Matthew to be one of his disciples, it showed that God chooses all sorts of people to do his work, including people who were normally considered outsiders. Matthew is only mentioned 7 times in the Bible, yet he's one of the most well-known disciples. According to the Gospels, Jesus approached him at a tax collector's booth and asked Matthew to follow him. The two then ate dinner at Matthew's house with many tax collectors and sinners. Jesus did this not as a demonstration of poor character, but to show that even the people society considered irredeemable were accepted by God. The circumstances
So yun nga
surrounding
sinasabi
that
ko no guys, yung mga apostles ni Jesus, hindi naman din sila mga perfecto. Hindi naman din sila yung mga perfectong mga tao na walang kasalanan. No? Talagang makakasalanan talaga sila. Talagang nabago lang sila ni Jesus. Ibig sabihin lang nun, kahit makasalanan ka, kahit anong nagawa mo kasalanan, kahit anong bigat pa yan, basta ibigay mo lang yung buhay mo sa Diyos, matatanggap ka pa rin yan. No? Yun yung ibig sabihin nun guys.
Matthew's death are largely a mystery. One account suggests that he died of old age, but it's more likely that he was martyred like most of his fellow disciples. There are various accounts of what may have happened to him, including stories about him being beheaded, stabbed, burned, or stoned. Number 5. Thomas. Thomas the Apostle isn't mentioned much in the Bible, and the details of his life are conflicting and obscure. But he became well known for his skepticism during one particularly famous event that earned him the nickname Doubting Thomas. The Gospel of John describes how Thomas doubted Jesus' resurrection, stating to his fellow disciples, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Jesus appeared and offered to let Thomas touch his wounds like he said he needed to in order to believe that the resurrection was real. This story was the foundation of evidence-based faith and for the concept of people who have not seen and yet have believed. Thomas was martyred on July 3rd in 72 AD. According to tradition, he was speared to death in Mylapore, India. Unlike the accounts of most of the other disciples' deaths, there are only a few stories about how Thomas died, and they're all similar. Are you familiar with the Doubting Thomas story? And did you know its origin? Tell me in the comments. And while you're there, make sure to like
Tinusok-tusok lang
and
daw, guys,
subscribe
yung
to the channel.
pagkamatay ni Doubting Thomas.
Son of Alphaeus. In case you haven't noticed, James was a popular name during biblical times. The Apostle James, son of Alphaeus, is only mentioned in the 4 lists of the Apostles, meaning that only 2 things are known for sure about him, that his name was James and that his father's name was Alphaeus. There are numerous speculations about him, but none of them can be proven as facts. To make matters even more confusing, while it's clear that James, son of Alphaeus, was a different person than his fellow apostle James, son of Zebedee, there are 2 other people named James in the Bible. One of them is Jesus' brother, also known as James the Just, and the other is known as James the Less, and it's unclear whether either of them are the same person as James, son of Alphaeus. Even the early church struggled with trying to figure this out. Because of all this confusion, it's hard to say how James, son of Alphaeus, died. Jesus' brother James met a violent end when he was pushed from a temple's pinnacle, beaten with a club, and then stoned to death. One account detailing the death of James, son of Alphaeus, claims that he was crucified during a preaching mission in Egypt. Another story says that he was stoned to death in Jerusalem. Regardless of how James the Apostle died, it's probably safe to say that he was martyred. Number 3. Jude. The Apostle Jude is known by several names, including Jude of James, Judas of James, Thaddeus, Judas, Thaddeus, and Lebbeus. Some people believe that he was Jesus' brother, but there are no clear statements in the Bible about this being the case, so nobody can say for sure whether both Judes were the same person. It's hard to speculate about Jude the Apostle's life or death without considering it as a possibility, however. Jude the Apostle was definitely a different person than Judas Iscariot, and it's believed that he went by the nickname Thaddeus to distinguish himself from Judas, who wasn't exactly a well-liked figure of the church during this time. Tradition holds that Jude the Apostle was martyred alongside Simon the Zealot in what is now the city of Beirut in 65 AD. At the time, the region was part of the Roman province of Syria. Religious artwork often depicts Jude holding an axe, which symbolizes how he died. One account claims that his remains were transported from Beirut to Rome in 1665 and were placed in a crypt at St. Peter's Basilica, where his bones share a tomb with Simon the Zealot. Another story claims that Jude's remains were preserved at an Armenian monastery in Kyrgyzstan, and that they were kept there at least until the mid-15th century. An ossuary bearing the inscription Judas Thaddeus was found alongside several unmarked ossuaries in Israel's Jezreel Valley. The site was dated to no later than the 2nd century, indicating that it could be Jude's burial place. Number 2. Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot's name only appears in the 4 lists of the apostles. Nobody knows what his nickname, the Zealot, means. One possibility is that he was a member of a Jewish sect called the Zealots, who were a revolution-seeking group in search of a Messiah. Another is that he was zealous about the study of Mosaic law, or for Jesus and his teachings. Some early mistranslations of the Bible confuse Simon with Jesus' brother, and inaccurately refer to him as Simon the Canaanite. This led to the belief that Simon the Zealot was present during Jesus' first miracle when he turned water into wine. But it's now thought that this may not have been the case. According to tradition, Simon preached in Egypt, but almost nothing else is known about him, and there are conflicting stories about how he died. The earliest records are from centuries after he died, which makes it even harder to say with any confidence what most likely happened. During the 5th century, the Armenian historian Moses of Turin wrote that Simon was martyred in the kingdom of Iberia. A compilation of the stories of saints' lives, known as the Golden Legend, claims that Simon the Zealot was martyred in Persia in 65 AD. Ethiopian Christians have said that he was killed in a central region of Israel called Samaria. One account says that Simon was crucified in Britain in 61 AD. Another story claims that he was sawed in half, while Eastern tradition holds that he died of old age in the ancient city of Edessa. Number 1. Judas Iscariot.
Guys,
The most famous, or perhaps infamous, apostle was Judas Iscariot. Even today, his name is synonymous with the word traitor. At one time, Judas was probably considered trustworthy. He was the designated treasurer for Jesus and the disciples. Yet the same scripture that describes his job also mentions how untrustworthy he was. Jesus told,
pero before pa naman tanggapin ni before niya patanggapin si Judas, guys, alam na ni Lord na si Judas yung magbe-betray sa kanya, no?
his disciples at the Last Supper, but he knew one of them was going to betray him. He then turned to Judas and said, "What you are about to do it quickly." At the time, none of the other apostles picked up on what that meant, because they assumed Jesus was talking about something money-related. According to the Bible, Judas met with some priests and agreed to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He later approached Jesus while being followed by the armed mob who captured him and took him to be crucified. It is in this way that greed motivated Judas to do something that led to Jesus' death. He immediately regretted what he did, but his life was, in effect, ruined. According to the book of Matthew, Judas hanged himself. The Gospel of Luke describes how Judas used the money he received for betraying Jesus to buy a field where he fell head first. According to the scripture, his body burst open and his intestines spilled out. It's not clear what this means, and both accounts were written after Judas's death, so it's possible that the writers got some of the details wrong.
Nagpamatay siya. Tapos may nagsabi daw na ang tawag dun, na sumabog daw yung katawan niya. Pero paano naman masasabog yun, dahil nagbigti lang naman siya. Pero hindi natin alam, no, guys. Yun nasabi, pero wala nang explanation.
We often hear of the 12 apostles as a group, but it's fascinating learning
then, guys,
more about...
yun itong video natin na to. Then UI Origins Explain. Subscribe nyo na siya. Siyempre mag-subscribe na rin kayo sa akin, guys. Subscribe nyo na, please like, share, subscribe, and hit nyo na yung notification bell dyan sa baba. And yun nga, guys, yung itong video natin. Salamat sa pagsama dito. Alam ko ibang-iba to sa mga content natin. Wala, guys, parang gusto ko lang, siyempre, Holy Week ngayon, siyempre dapat mag-iba muna tayo ng content. Holy Week magre-react tayo sa mga nakakatawa, sa mga nakakatawa. So, siyempre, dapat related din, no? So yun, guys, salamat sa panonood dito. It's your boy Ian. Goodbye.